So Module 1, Lesson 4, Documentation, Execution and Debugging. So in this session what we want to do is we want to look at some of the final pieces that we just need to execute to tidy up and complete our initial build of that framework. So we want to look at getting Claude Code to create a README document so that we've got an overview of the project. We want some getting started documentation to help onboard new people that are using this. An architecture document I always find really useful because it helps Claude at a later stage when you're adding tests, and it's good for your understanding of the actual structure. And then we're going to talk about the CLAUDE.md file, which is a memory file that Claude can use from one session to the next. So all of this is documented in the full course, and you can get the full course and all of the contents and details in the online course. So to create the README files and the getting started files, etc., you can use and copy these prompts. So what I'd normally do is go to Claude or ChatGPT and say, what contents would you normally put in a development project for a README file? And then I can use that, cut and paste it and copy it into my project in Visual Studio Code. If I go back to Claude Code and we start with a clean prompt, and I'll paste that in there and get Claude Code to create me that README file. And it's already got all of the context from building the project, from the PRD, the PRP, so it should be able to create me a very comprehensive README document. And then once I've created that document, I'm going to go and create a getting started document which will help onboard new people to this framework. And again, this getting started document will evolve over time and we'll add to this so that it'll document things like how to add tests, etc. So this is details about running the project, creating the tests, and providing a degree of overview for new users. And you can see here it's creating a README file. It's written that to playwright-test.readme. And then once that's finished, I'll paste in the next one for the getting started. Paste that in there. So this is the getting started document we want. I'll let Claude Code do that. So whilst it's running that, we have a look at our playwright tests and we should have a README document in here. Now it's important to bear in mind we've got a number of README files now. We've got the README file which is specific to the playwright tests and that framework we've just created. We've also got a README that is specific to the PRP process. Okay, and at a later stage what I'd probably do is create a higher level README file that describes the whole PRP process and the playwright tests and how to add tests, which we'll come on to later with the PTP system, the product testing prompts system that we use to create tests and test cases. So once it's created the getting started, I'll also want to create an architecture document. I find these useful for providing context later on when we're creating test cases or maybe updating the page object model, etc. And it's also useful for you to understand how this project has been structured. So we've created the README, we've created the getting started, and we're going to create the architecture document now with this next prompt. So just let that finish up. Table of contents there for our getting started, environment setup, IDE, running your first tests, and now it's created that, we can paste in our architecture document. So in this document what I want is details about how everything's been structured, sort of underlying components, how those components interact, and how we can develop and add to this framework at a later stage when we start adding more tests and test suites to this project. So the final file to add is a Claude.md, and this acts as a memory file for Claude Code, kind of sets the baseline context every time you return to Claude Code and start a new session. So it's important to build out a Claude.md file that summarizes everything. So again, if you come back to the course notes, you'll see that I've got another example of how to create a Claude.md file here, and I explain this in a little bit more detail. So I actually got Claude or ChatGPT to create this for me, but what I need it to do is to make sure that every time we start a session it loads the information from this Claude.md, and I want it to have the most concise, accurate overview of the project before we start working on it together, me and Claude Code. So again, copy that prompt and I paste that in, and you'll notice that I'm saying ultra think, which means I want it to make sure it makes a really good job of this, and it really does think deeply about what it needs to create for this file. So I'll paste that in there, make sure the final file is succinct, accurate and to the point, and paste that in there and give it a minute or two. Because we're ultra thinking, it's probably going to take a minute or two for that to complete. So whilst that's completing, let's have a quick look. We've got in the Playwright test folder, we've got our README document. Okay, so this is a bit of an overview about the whole project itself, key features, prerequisites, etc. We've created the Getting Started document, which is good for onboarding new people. Okay, so that's got a bit about environment setup, IDE, all that kind of good stuff. And then we've got the architecture document, and that goes into the structure of the project, the page objects, the test structure, and a lot of information about how those components and test scripts and tests are actually constructed. So this is, again, it's useful for you as a user of the framework, and also later on you can get Claude Code to read this architecture document when it's perhaps building out more page object models, for example, for other pages that we need to write tests for. Okay, let's give that a few minutes for the Claude.md file to complete, and then we can wrap up with one final run of the tests. Okay, keep it succinct, focus on what's actually built, include specific commands and patterns from the project, remove redundant sections, make it actionable for AI assistance. Okay, and here we go. And we've got wrote Claude.md file, purpose, automated end-to-end framework, current focus, test, checkbox functionality, bit about the framework and the status. Okay, so we'll have a look at our Claude.md file, and in here will be all of the context we'll need whenever we start with Claude Code in new sessions. Right, so what I typically do at this stage is I'd actually exit from Claude Code, and now it's completed everything, and so /exit. Okay, so back out into the session, and we'll start a clean new session with only that Claude.md context loaded when you start the session. So Claude will automatically read that as context, and now what we can do is you can either go to the README or the Getting Started documents and work out what the command is. Actually, in the Claude.md file here, it does actually say how to run the specific tests. So what we can do if we want to do that is copy that, and we change directory to our Playwright tests. Okay, and then in here, what I want to do, and I can either do this from within the Claude Code console, or I could do it from the other console, but I'm going to tell Claude Code to run that, and what I want is to do it in headed mode, Chromium, and that should run our initial suite of test cases for the checkbox. Now this is interesting because, okay, it has failed to run that. Chromium project's not found, and you should find, because we're running it in the Claude Code terminal, that it will try to resolve this issue. So that might have been a mistake on my part, or an issue with the test imports. There we go, checkbox looks correct. So it's saying npm test run test suite, running that. So we'll click yes on that, and you can see that Claude Code is going through a debug process to work out what's going on here. And I usually stop and read all of these. I don't let it do them automatically, because I get a feel for what's going wrong, and I can prompt Claude Code if I need to. So npm run test Chrome headed. It's getting there. It's still working this out. Thinks it's got some missing dependencies, so it's going to use Node Package Manager to install those dependencies, and then run the checkbox tests again. So let's see if it works this time round. I notice I've not touched a single bit of code in any of this. I leave Claude Code to do all of that on its own, and I avoid as far as possible to get involved with the code, because let's face it, Claude's better at it than I am. Okay, so it's going to have its fourth attempt at trying to get this right. And what I normally do is, after we've gone through these debug sessions, is I'll get it to work out lessons learnt from this, and I'll get it to add those lessons learnt to the CLAUDE.md file, so that we only make this mistake and we only learn this lesson once, and that it's always there. So here we go. Let's see if it gets it right this time round. There we go. Now we've got the tests are running. So I didn't have to debug that. I left Claude Code to debug it. All right, but what we want to make sure is that we capture what went wrong there, and that Claude learns from it, so that in future sessions that we don't make the same mistake. I think actually the website we're going to is going to be a bit slow here, but there's one of the sessions. So we've got 4 agents running 4 tests in parallel, and it looks like it is pretty slow at the moment, but Claude Code has worked out how to resolve that issue. So what I might say here is I might actually tell Claude Code, because to my mind what was wrong there was the actual speed of the application under test. So I'm going to say looks like the application under test is running really slowly. Probably your tests are running correctly, and press escape again to interrupt that. So I'm telling it what I think was going on there, and then I'm also going to prompt it, the tests are actually running now. What? Please capture what you did to resolve this and add this lesson learnt to Claude.md, so that in future runs we won't have to go through that iterative process of working out why that didn't run first time out. So there you go, document lessons learned in Claude.md, and hopefully next time we come back in it'll just run straight off, and we'll be in business. There you go, that was the lesson it learned. Must run from playwright test directory. Okay, so yes, and let's just to prove a point, I'll come out of here. Yes, I wanted to make that update, and I even put in there that the application may respond slowly at times. This is normal behavior, so that's great. And that's the process you've got to get into with building these frameworks and writing the tests in this agentic manner, is that this whole iterative process of learning the lessons and getting Claude Code to work out what those lessons are. So if I go back into Claude Code, and actually what I might do this time round, it will have read that Claude.md file with the updated lessons learned, and I'm just going to say please, rather than run the actual command itself, I'm going to just say please run the tests in get the test file in, copy relative path, paste that in there just for Chromium, and let's see how Claude Code deals with that. Okay, so it's worked out, it needs to go to the playwright directory, it's running that, it's going to checkbox spec, it's Chromium. It hasn't added, I forgot to add headed in there, so it's going to run those in the background, but we should just get a final report of that test run any second now. There we go, first 2 tests, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go, all 10 text box tests passed and ran successfully in Chromium in 13 seconds. Job done. Okay, in the next module, we're going to look at building out a process and a workflow for adding test cases and enhancing this playwright framework over a period of time.